There's actually a lot of studies that talk about happy employees, engaged employees create really happy customers, right? There's a direct correlation there. You said something though that I'd like to probe on also before we kind of dive into our main topic. You talked about frictions, right?
Mm.
Tell me a little bit about the frictions, because if we don't talk about that and we don't talk about solving that, then that is going to transition over. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the big friction points.
Yeah, there's a lot of different elements of friction, right? And one of them is this notion of we've got to pick up the pieces from a sport angle. We've got to pick up the pieces because someone somewhere said this. Then there's the notion of, when support aren't able to achieve something, sounds like you're just being a blocker, right? We're bringing in the money and you're and there's a real lack of empathy between the two teams. There's a real lack of understanding that actually our common goal is the same here, right? But there's all these kind of almost microaggressions that happen underneath the surface. And because they're not addressing, because they don't spend time with each other, because there's that kind of animosity, they fester. And that animosity is often built, whether people like it or not, it's often built from either current or past leaders. So, for example, when I was a sales leader, the amount of stress you have as a sales leader trying to make sure that you're hitting the numbers every single month. And then one month, like, amazing, I hit it, we smashed it, that's fantastic. And then those above are like, great, you start from zero, do it again next month. So there's all that pressure that comes from there. And then on the other side, we've got all these angry customers. We've got all these customers with issues, and we're trying to stay on top of it. We're understaffed. We're struggling here. And rather than the current leaders trying to reduce and dismantle that internal friction, what often happens is eventually one of them they'll drink their own Kool-Aid, if you like. They will sort of be like, hey, actually, we are hard done by. Oh, actually, sales do just sell whatever, or support are just being a blocker to what I need. And it is very much looking internally rather than understanding we're all here for the same thing, right? If this company doesn't make money, eventually it shuts down, and then we're all in a position that we don't want to be in. So how do we start removing those frictions and understanding that when we kind of collaborate, when we understand and empathize with each other, we can move forward? And then that kind of brings us on to the main topic we've got today as well, because a big part of it is that notion of victim mentality. And that really, really is, in my opinion, I don't want to be over dramatic, but it's kind of rife within customer experience.
Well, okay, so I want to get into that, but I have to call out something you just said there, right? There's so many similarities between sales and customer success. And in customer success, we are cross-selling, we are upselling. One bad customer experience can sour them from the brand and they're looking elsewhere, right? So every business should be focused on NRR, right? Net recurring revenue, right? So behind those NPS scores, the loyalty scores and everything is an actual revenue number that's being maintained. And we have the most conversations with customers than anybody. We have the greatest impact and influence on that. So therefore, to look at us as a cost center, right? When we're cross-selling, we're upselling, we're maintaining, we're increasing NRR, like it's ridiculous, right?
Mm.
So I just wanted to call that out. That's what I took away from what you were saying there, and where like upper management is kind of reverting back, right? And like they're eating their own dog food and they're looking at us as a cost center, not a value center, not an experience center. So in that context, why do we have victim mentalities? I mean, we should be holding our shoulders up high. We're like, we kind of got the controls here, don't we? But yet there's this victim mentality.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of what you're saying as well. We are a value center. We do add a lot of opportunities to cross sell. We speak to customers. I mean, essentially, companies need to understand that the people that are speaking to the customers directly are the ones that are going to hold the keys to whether your customer comes back on 9 times out of 10. That's the notion. What I see a lot of, and I'll kind of give you the background in terms of where I started seeing, where I realized that this was actually probably a bigger issue than I'd ever realized before. Last year, I was on a bit of a crusade to kind of talk everyone in customer experience up, right? I was kind of like, hey, you do a great job. You need to believe in yourself. You need to push forward. You need to really focus on the positives and what you can achieve. And I had some great conversations. I listened to some great speakers, and there was always kind of this niggle at the back, right? There's always something going on where there was this kind of negativity that was coming out. And I went to a conference where there was some really fantastic speakers who I love to hear from. And there was a few who always had this, the only way I can describe it is a victim mentality. It was a case of product and engineering doesn't listen to us. We don't get the money we need to be able to do what we want to do. Sales are looked at as kings and we're looked at as paupers. And it was over and over again. And I realized that this is a learned behavior from previous leadership, from where support was very much just seen as a cost center. And what's happened is some of the people who have risen through the ranks of their organization has continued this victim mentality. And rather than focus on those elements that you were just speaking about, Steve, they focus on the notion of, when are we going to get the extra people we need to be able to do X? Or why doesn't anyone understand how important CSAT is or NPS is? Why am I talking to a brick wall? I've always heard is, when are we going to have our seat at the table and all the rest of it? And when people start realizing that the power is in their hands to be able to tell the right story, their own seat at the table, get their voice heard, that whole mentality will shift. And there's a lot that I learned when I was in project management or in sales about being able to tell that story. And for me, it's until we move out of our own way and remove that element of, why is this happening to me? And why does no one listen to me? And that very egocentric, well, no one cares about support, until we remove that and start understanding what's in it for them, much like we often do for our customers, we're pretty much going down the wrong road.